The new update has rolled out to a small number of nebulas in Infinite Galaxy and will be landing everywhere over the next couple weeks. There is so much to talk about with auxiliary flagships, the ability to battle higher level pirates, and more. Stick around in this video for everything you need to know. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming and this video has been sponsored by the makers of Infinite Galaxy. And there is a lot to talk about with the latest patch that has just landed in the game, which is not in every nebula yet, but will be over the course of the next week or so. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is that the combat mechanics have changed and the developers are giving us an opportunity to reset crew, flagships, and also warships. I'm going to give some really detailed thoughts around what I think players should be doing with this. But first, just to remind everybody how the combat mechanics have changed, is that now when you go and you battle, and by the way, here's those higher level pirates I was talking about, you are going to first battle against the same type that you bring, then battle against the type that you restrain, and then battle the type that you're weak against. So I'm bringing all frigates. If I battle this pirates, you'll see visually here, we're going to take out the enemy frigates first. Then, because frigates are restraining cruisers, my frigates will go hit their cruisers, which are in red. So see the frigates are all dying in blue on the enemy side. Then the red bar is shrinking. Now the destroyers, the yellow bar, get killed last. Now, if you didn't quite understand what was happening there, you could always go and visually see all of that unfold by looking at the replay of one of your battles. And in even the replay, you can see the frigates are going to go duke it out in the front. Then they're going to go tackle the cruisers in the back, and you'll see them fly over there. And then, last but not least, you'll go and you will completely smash the destroyers with the fleet that I've got set up here. That is the Artemis and the Orion, and you can see I've got an auxiliary flagship, which, by the way, that is a can of worms that we definitely need to open up and talk about. Oh, yeah. The auxiliary flagship leaves me with perhaps a few questions, as well as some things that I've uncovered, and I need to share those with you. So the auxiliary flagship system is really cool. It gives you a ton of diversity to what you can do with your flagships, and of course is elevating the power level of everybody right now. It also makes epic flagships way, way, way more relevant. So the auxiliary flagship system is where when you go to set up your fleet, you can pick a second flagship that goes in here. The captain will matter. Technically, it says that the outfitting, your equipment that's on there, doesn't matter, although I'm a little confused on that point because you do still see the flagship attacking, so do the base values of the weapons that you put on that flagship matter? Like, do the enhancements to the flagship itself still take place? I would assume so with your outfitting, and I think that what doesn't take place from your outfitting is specifically, and this is very important, specifically, I think it is these bonuses over here, the fleet effects. I think those don't happen, but I think that perhaps, and I don't know, your base level of your outfitting, that you can see this piece over here is giving hit points to the flagship. I think that still applies. I need to do a little bit of investigation to figure that out. And also you get some of the fleet leadership limit, half of the fleet leadership limit from your captain and also your flagship level itself, and that's kind of a big deal. And if there are any other skills and buffs from your flagship, those take their full effect. So all of that is listed in here. So to quickly summarize, you are going to want to level up your secondary or auxiliary flagships because you still do get half of the leadership boost from having them higher level, and having a captain on the secondary flagship is also going to be extremely important because not only do you get the full effect of their skills, but also you get a little bit of the benefit of their leadership limit boost as well, which is nice. You get half of the benefit of that. So this means fleets are going to be much larger. I need to go train up some more frigates for sure. And I'm going to have to decide if I want to invest in some different flagships and what the most optimal combos will now be, which I honestly don't know. A part of what makes this more complicated than you would think, because look, there's like some easy choices here. You'd think the Orion does like the same sort of friggety stuff that the Artemis does. You'd think that would be just an easy choice, but it's not. And the reason that it's not, the reason that it takes more thought than that, and that I'm going to be doing a lot of thinking, is that there are now new skills that are added to legendary tier flagships when they are rank 7 or higher. These skills are very significant. The property increased damage, according to the deployed fleet power, is crazy. 315% damage? Wait, what? I mean, I don't exactly understand how that works, if that's the flagship's own damage or if that's the warship's damage. Couldn't be warship damage. That would be too insane, right? But the important part that I think is really easy to understand is the cooldown and added effect. So for this particular skill, every 9 seconds, you are going to increase your frigate armor for 4 seconds by 170%. That's huge. So frigates get even more tanky. But to give some examples here, Forging Fire on the Hephaestus is going to increase your fleet's attack and reduce the enemy fleet's attack for a 5-second window. And there are 2 tiers of that skill, it looks like. The base level, it looks like it's 11% reduction in boost. And then at the higher tier, it's a 22% reduction in boost. So each of these flagships does kind of some interesting stuff, especially at the legendary tier. And there could be some very interesting combos depending on how important, just how important, is that extra skill. So one thing that I found that I'm definitely confused about and need some clarification is that although it says that your outfitting for your secondary flagship doesn't take effect, one thing I noticed is that in the stat sheet over here for the fleet details, it is appearing. So right now I took my kinetic weapons off of the Orion. Okay, and this is very important because now when I go and I equip those kinetic weapons, you're going to see that the stat boost is in fact there. And this brings me to something I'm a little bit uncertain about. And I'm very eager, if you leave a comment on how this works, I'd be very curious to see it. Okay, when I go, and I'll go now to the fleet, I added the kinetic weapons, as I was saying, and boom, the kinetic weapon stats are now here. I gain about 10% of stats, and in fact, about 11%, which is exactly what the weapons had. That's a little bit confusing. So it says the outfitting doesn't do anything, but I would look at the fleet details, it does. But when I battled against pirates and I had the gear equipped versus not, it didn't seem to make a difference. So I don't know how much we can trust what's in this stat sheet right now, or at least maybe I'm misunderstanding, which is important. And I mention this because there is something curious that has me a little bit confused, which is that you would think that this right over here, this fleet weapon effect, would take place for the secondary flagship, because that's a part of their skills, right? It's not a part of their outfitting, but it's a part of their skills. When I look in the stat sheet, I don't get this 6% boost at all. So you can see when I remove this flagship, you would think that I would lose the 11% from my kinetic weapons, because we see that that's appearing in the stat sheet, and the additional 6% of having the kinetic weapon boost to the entire fleet. But hold on, I got to refresh this. That's not the case at all. 70.2% in the kinetic weapon attack. So I don't know. I'm a little bit confused right now about the relationship between the outfitting and the fleet weapon boost of the secondary or auxiliary flagship. And here's why this is like hugely important, because there are some flagships where I've honestly been a little bit confused as to kind of why they have the primary weapon that they do. For example, I've always been a little bit confused that the Hades has laser weapon attack when the highest tier of a destroyer that's available to us has missile weapons, right? That's a mismatch in the typing there. And sure, you could use a lower tier of warship. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But that always felt a little weird to me. But if I can trust what the stat sheet is showing me, which is that the laser weapon boost here, this effect, the fleet effect, doesn't take place for the auxiliary flagship, that means I could use tier 10 destroyers. If I was using a flagship that had missile weapon boost, I could get the benefit of that missile weapon boost. So for example, let's say, here's one I really like, it's the Poseidon. I could use a Poseidon primary and then put the Hades as the secondary. And now I'm getting the full benefit of the missile weapon attack for my tier 10 destroyers. I mean, that would be a really, really big deal. And it is kind of a bummer that there's really not a lot of options for missile weapons over here. I guess I could use Titan. I could use a Titan primary, and the secondary would be the Hades. This is a big deal. Like 30% of stats is just like absolutely massive. This might be like the best insight I give you in this video. So I'm going to maybe ask the developers to see if I can get a clarification on that one, because that definitely will influence the flagship investments that I make. In fact, I would almost certainly like slam dunk choose the Titan once I get to tier 10 for my destroyers. But in the meantime, I'd primary the Hades. I mean, it's just, there is a lot to think through with these pairings. And I think perhaps the best advice I can give until we know more information is to wait a little bit, okay? I don't even know, like, I got to think through twice as many fleet captains now. So all these crew members that I thought I would go and reset, where I was like, yeah, I'm definitely not going to use them. Maybe I will use them. Maybe they do become more relevant. So for example, maybe for a cruiser fleet, I actually do want to use a crew member that I thought for sure I would never use. I thought for sure I wasn't going to use Zhen Wenzhou, but maybe I will use her as a captain and get the mobility speed for my cruiser fleet, because now that's a secondary captain, not the primary captain, and that gives a good use for Zhen Wenzhou, because if I were to try to bring 4 fleets, which I don't think I could do right now, that is a lot of crew and a lot of captains that I'm just not prepared to commit, and a lot of flagships that I just don't have, right? So there's a lot more relevance for crew members now, and we got to take a harder look at, like, gosh, like how relevant is like flagship armor and shields, or maybe flagship weapon attack, or I don't know. There's definitely some rethinking into who's going to be a captain or not. So there will be a 7-day window in which you can go and make these adjustments to your crew. You can reset them and reinvest in a different crew member, or your flagships, or your warships. I would just slow your roll. Wait till the end of this period of time to make all your commitments there, because over the next 7 days, obviously, we're going to be doing a lot of testing to try to figure out what the best combos are. One thing I will say that people could consider doing is trading out their lower tiers of flagships. So you can see, as an example, I could take my tier 1 cruisers and I can turn them into destroyers. Now you may be thinking, Chisgule, why would you make that exchange? Why would you do that? And the reason I think the lower tier flagships flipped over to destroyers is kind of a cool idea is that when you are gathering resources, destroyers have the most load of any of the warship types. So for newer players to the game that are maybe not able to get full capacity, right, on gathering, or you're trying to make a really great fleet to go gather from planets, I think that is a pretty reasonable exchange. Now I've got more destroyers. I don't know what to do with lower tiers of warships. Like, I guess you send them to pillage players and you don't care if they die, I guess. But since they are just sitting around defending your city, I think that exchange into perhaps destroyers from, the other types that you've got is a pretty reasonable pick. I just can't imagine a world in which I would ever use lower tiered frigates, like tier 3 frigates, with my Artemis. Now, with that said, I do want to talk about the tiers of warships for a moment, because the stats of the highest tier of warship is now just outright better. So tier 10 frigates, before you'd look at it and go, well, like some of them have more armor than the others, and maybe there's like something going on there where you might want T9s in some cases and T10s in other cases. But the stats of T10s are just better. They're just better. So we're looking at cruisers now. The hit points are 20,000. The armor is 3.2. The shields are 8.4. And the damage output is 10.3. I'm abbreviating some stuff here. And if we go look at the lower tier, the hit points are lower, right? It's now 18,000 and 3,000 armor and 7,000 shields and 952 on the damage output, right? So everything is lower. So there was a world before where I would have thought maybe you do use like a lower tier for some reason. And now I don't think that's at all the case. I don't know that you would ever use a lower tier of warship, right? So there's going to be some stuff we need to figure out about that relationship between the fleet boosting effect of flagships, which I showed you over here, the fleet boosting effect of the flagship, the type of warship you bring, the tier of warship you're bringing. There are a lot of things up in the air. The way that interaction works for the auxiliary or secondary flagship is very important, right? Like for me, oh boy. I mean, I'm looking perhaps at Titan primary with Hades secondary. I like the Artemis primary with perhaps the Orion secondary. And depending on how many fleets I'm bringing, right? Maybe I upgrade to a legendary flagship. Maybe I use the Odysseus as the secondary. And then when it comes to using cruisers, I might be looking at Hephaestus primary with the Cyclops secondary, right? That way I take advantage of having the right weapon type on each of these flagships. You heard it here first, or maybe you heard it somewhere else. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of this update. I've covered a ton of ground. Obviously, this is a little bit more technical in nature. What do I plan to reset? What do I plan to do? Until I've done more testing, man, I just need time to take in everything that's happened here and to figure it all out. So one thing I want to add, Chisgule from the future here, is I just went and I did a test. And I battled against a level 34 pirate, which is the toughest level pirate that I can actually still beat right now. And in one test, I had absolutely no equipment whatsoever on the Orion. In the other, I outfitted it with a bunch of green gear. And it's all pretty much max level green gear. So for me, that's level 10, okay? And in one test, where I don't have the gear on, I have 33 leadership of repairs. And the test where I do have the gear on, I have 27 leadership in repairs. So I wonder if that's just the weapons themselves on the flagship doing damage, and that is adding some value. If the stats are at all at play, other than the fleet lifting effects, I don't think they are, but I also don't know. What I know is when I have stuff equipped, I'm doing better. I think it's because the equipment does damage, but I'll see if I can find out exactly kind of what's going on there. Now, one thing you may have been wondering is, hey, Chisgule, does this mean with the auxiliary fleet I could use the Peleus and pair it with the Achilles and get ridiculous amounts of gathering and resources from planets? Does that work? And unfortunately, the answer is no, it does not work. Here I've got the one flagship, the Achilles. When I go and I try to gather from a planet, you'll see that I have a boost of 515.9. When I go and I add in the additional flagship, there it is, the Peleus, it is improving my fleet leadership limit. However, when I go to gather from this planet, it's giving me the exact same amount of resources, and it's taking the exact same amount of energy with or without that additional flagship. So I don't think the gathering skill boost is working. I think that it should work. I think the skill boost should work, and okay, there is a little bit of good news here, is that I can bring slightly more warships, so I can gather a little bit more. That's kind of nice, assuming you add a little bit of a leadership limit boost there, but otherwise, the planet gathering with the auxiliary flagship seems to be unchanged. Again, leave comments and join our Discord, discord.gg/Chisgule, where we've got people that talk about Infinite Galaxy and share your thoughts. Until next time, you have fun smashing your nebula, and good luck with the updates to your fleets. I'd wait a couple days while we all figure this stuff out and see what we think the new meta will be.